Hi guys, welcome to my fan restoration video. Today's Saturday the 18th of January 2020 and today is the day that I'm going to go through the process of restoring this Revelair 16-inch pedestal fan. This is a fan that was made in Australia, down in Sydney, in the early 1960s, and it's just an example of high quality Australian manufacturing back in the day. And as far as I know, the fan itself, apart from one item, is completely untouched. So it has the original wiring, original plug, nothing's been disturbed inside as far as I know, because of the fact that the cord itself is original. But of course, the fan doesn't run. It was sold as a non-functional machine. Just by looking at the cable, I'm assuming it's the cable that's at fault. So just looking at the fan itself, you've got a aluminium fan blade, 4 leaves that are riveted to a steel hub. The cage itself, thick wire cage. These are actually handmade, these ones. Then you go through to a steel pole and a cast iron base. The base very, very heavy and very stable. Turning the fan around, so you can see the shape of that cage, very unusual and quite striking. And we've got a aluminium motor cover, I call it a bullet cover. These are your 2 oilers on top here for your motor. This fan's on almost its lowest setting in terms of height. The adjuster here, this is a solid billet of alloy, very, very overbuilt. Everything about this fan is overbuilt, you'll find. You've got a cast aluminium motor bracket, cast output shaft flywheel. Inside here, you've got a sintered bronze bush, which enables the fan to operate left and right, and tilt on these bolts here, which run through to the stator, which enable the fan head itself to tilt back and forth, because this is an orbital style oscillating fan. Looking at the pile of stuff we've got here, we've got a new extension cord, 5-meter extension cord. That's probably the cheapest way to buy a new cable for your fan. A new reusable plug for that cord. I don't want to use one of these molded plugs. It just doesn't look right with these old fans. Some replacement grommets. There's only 1 grommet required on the fan itself through the fan motor cover. I also use a second one of these to act as a cord relief. We've got some 3-in-1 oil for the motor. Now this is a specially formulated oil for electric motors. It contains no detergent. It is different than the usual 3-in-1 product, which is available in Australia, which comes in this tin. This is not the right stuff. Do not use this in your vintage fan. You will clog up the pores, the micro pores in your sintered bronze bushes. Very important not to use the wrong stuff. Now you cannot buy this in Australia. You must actually import this. I bring this in from the States. Quite expensive, probably close to $30 by the time you pay for shipping. But 1 bottle of this will go a long way. It'll last a long time. Isopropyl alcohol for cleaning. Some new terminals. This one here, you just need the one on this particular job, and that's for the earth. Toothbrush for cleaning, razor blade for trimming of cabling, a imperial set of Allen keys. You'll only use the one, which is the 1/8 of an inch size. Some cream cut and polish for the paintwork, and a standard set of pliers, needle nose pliers, some side cutters, and a couple of screwdrivers for the screws, some heat shrink for the soldering work, heaps of cotton tips. You'll use heaps of those, very important, and some good old WD-40. So I always have a tin of that handy. Okay, first step in the dismantling process is to remove the grill and the fan blade. Now the fan blade has to go with the grill and has to be fed out of the grill once the grill's been removed. So first thing you do, just get your screwdriver and remove the retaining screw for the fan hub. Undo that. Then we take out the oil fillers. Put those away safely. Now these are actually made of brass, so these polish up really nice, so you can see the brass colour underneath there. Okay, then we go through and remove the 4 screws which retain the blade set. So you'll have 4 screws. Now this cage just clips on to this front motor housing here. So we just basically just clip this forward. Okay, so just unclip one side, bring the other side around, grab the blade, and bring the blade forward with the cage. Bring the blade down on a chair. You just grab the blade, bring it up, and just feed it through the cage. Try not to make much contact with the actual cage itself. Now, the first thing to do once you've got everything off here is to check the end float of the actual blade. The end float there is basically the measurement of how much fore and aft movement there is on the rotor shaft. That amount there, that is about perfect. Quite often the fibre washers in the on the shafts disintegrate and wear out. This one's pretty good. This bush here, it sits as a sintered bronze bush. It's hammered into this this motor bracket. With the movement back and forth, you do get wear between the aluminium post that runs through that bush. Now there would be some play from the factory, but what you're supposed to do is put oil down inside this point here, and that lubricates that joint. Quite often you find that these oil systems are completely bone dry. Now when you take these caps off, you'll have an 1.5 to 2 inch strip or piece of cotton wick which absorbs the oil, brings it down to the actual bushing, and there's a piece of felt that runs around the bushing. It in turn fills with oil, and the bush then absorbs the oil. Now here's an example of what a bush looks like. Okay, so that the shaft basically slides over this and spins. Now this is from a smaller model of Revelair fan, but they do look exactly like that. Now these bushes, it's part of the process of making them. In the sintering process, they introduce microscopic interconnecting holes that run right through from one side of the bush to the other. And when you introduce oil on the outside of the bush, it migrates and works its way through to the center. Now the reason you can't use 3-in-1 oil like this is that this oil contains a detergent, and detergent is a newer development with oil, and it's great in car engines where it removes contaminants from the engine itself into the oil, and it's then removed with an oil change. With fans, with sintered bronze bushings, if you add oil here which has a detergent in it, what it does, being a detergent, it tends to clump the dirt molecules together, and in time those large clumps of dirt block up all the holes and all the pores. So in time, if you were to add oil to this bush, it wouldn't work its way through to the center. So all the oiling in the world of the fan itself from the top is not going to get through to the bush, and eventually the shaft is going to wear a groove in the bottom of the bush, particularly at the front from the weight of the blade, and then you're going to have a fan with a blade or rotor shaft that can move up and down, and in time that poses a big problem, because eventually what will happen is the actual blade won't rotate around, it'll go up and down and around, creates a lot of noise and vibration, and you'll have a fan which is just noisy and horrible to use. Now you can see just inside there, that's the actual rotor spinning inside the stator. You can see by the actual size of this that the motors in these old fans are much larger than modern fans. The blades themselves have a steeper pitch and a large surface area compared with modern fans that have a shallow pitch. Modern fan motors can't handle the load that these old fan motors can handle, which is part of the reason why they're so durable. And the fact that the manufacturer right at the start wants you to oil this motor basically means that these bushes are designed to last. They make it easy for you to do this. See, in a modern fan, there's no oil ports. So you use a fan, it has a certain amount of lubricant introduced into the bushings at the factory, maybe a bit of felt was wrapped around, but it's soaked with oil. It'll give you your 12 months, 2 years, but eventually that oil is going to be consumed with friction and heat. And at that point, the bushings will grab the rotor shaft and it'll fail. Now, those little fuses are hidden, so the idea is that you buy a fan these days, use it for a year or two, and then you go and get another one. Whereas these fans were designed to last a long time, and I've got, this is the 20th Revelair fan I've restored, or going to restore, and I've got 9 Revelair vintage fans in the house operating in different rooms. None of the fans I've got here are younger than 55 years old, and they all work beautifully after they've been put through the process I'm about to put this fan through. They'll need to be rewired. This wiring is always a disaster. It has a rubber insulator on each of the 3 wires internally, and it's a dead short waiting to happen. This particular fan has a plug here, which is beyond dangerous. If you look inside there, that's wire. That's carrying 240 volts. And as you can see, it looks like there's actually only one wire connected. So there's no wonder the thing's not working. Okay, right, next thing to do is take off this motor cover. Now there's a flywheel that runs underneath here, which is always rotating when the fan's in operation. And I'm just going to turn this around. And there's a grub screw here, which is a 1/8 of an inch drive. We just need to loosen that and remove this flywheel from the output shaft. Just undo this, is already loose. There's a few screws on this thing that are already loose. Quite a short thread. I'd normally just take those straight out. You don't want it falling out of here because you'll never find another one. Not easily anyway. And then you just wriggle this like so, and that just drops down. That has to be removed before you can get the motor cover off. And you've got a single screw in the back here. Remove this. This has got quite a long thread, this screw. It comes out. And then you very gently just wriggle the motor cover. So you just drop it down like that. Now the cord is still running through the fan. So you just need to pull it up a bit, just get a bit of slack. So you can remove this cover. And just allow the cord to travel up through that hole. Okay. As you can see here, there's holes on the side which pass through these bolts. This is the stator I was talking about before. The stator is attached directly to the motor bracket. Inside there is going to be the usual mess. That's pretty normal. Now, the wiring on this fan, being a pedestal, is very simple. All the internal wiring, you can see that there. All this internal wiring on these old fans is always okay. It looks to be a more modern PVC insulated wiring. It's always completely intact. There's no need to replace that. So the good news is the switch itself and the wiring from the switch to the coil here doesn't need to be replaced. Also, the wiring that runs from this switch to the motor itself, these 2 white wires here, it's always intact. Now it's a solid wire in here, doesn't like to be flexed excessively. Okay, so looking at the back of the fan here, the first thing we'll do now is we'll remove these screws here, and we'll just loosen those up. And then we'll remove this cord relief here. Now underneath here we have a earth wire, this one here. These are quite tight often. I've seen a lot of these screws for the earth all stripped out from screwdrivers slipping. Now looking at that wire there, you can already see that it's just disintegrating. Okay, completely unsafe. Same with this wiring here for your active. So as we can see here, the terminal on the left is your active and the one on the right is your neutral. Okay, so this will all be nicely cleaned up, and you'll be amazed how well this paint comes up with a nice, just a very gentle cut and polish. The Hamiltonian paint is very, very durable. There's a couple of imperfections there. There's just one there. But apart from that, as far as motor covers go for these fans, that's in excellent condition. Just lifting this motor up, you can see your output shaft. There's another sintered bronze bush that runs up inside this, this extension here. These are your two adjusters for your horizontal shaft pins that control end float. So what we'll be doing now is we'll be removing the coil and we'll be removing the top cover for the gearbox. First thing I'll do is just remove the cardboard cover here for the switch. These screws also hold the switch onto a bracket that's behind it. We'll undo one screw there to release this motor lead. Okay, so I've got that screw there, or this terminal released from this part of the switch. I've removed these two wires, one for the this side of the motor, that's for the for your active. Just going to take off these two screws here for the coil, and the coil and the switch will then be released. That is released. Remove that screw, don't lose that. And that's your isolator. Make sure that goes back on when it goes in place. We'll put that aside in the pile of parts. Okay, now we've got the cover for the gearbox. We'll just remove these. Yeah, behind this cover is a gasket. The gasket should be reused. It's a particular thickness. It's important that the thickness of the gasket is maintained because this top plate has a screw here which adjusts and maintains the end float of the output shaft for the gearbox. Okay, so that's that pin I was talking about there. Put that aside, and we've got this gasket I was talking about. Always make sure you get that off in one piece. There's no reason why you need to replace the gasket. You can reuse that. Okay, looking at the back of the motor, you've got two screws, one here and one here. We're going to attempt to get this off. These are quite often very difficult to get off, and these are easy. Okay, there you go. These are quite often very difficult to get off. So these have got a spring washer behind the screw. Quite often when you buy these fans, they don't oscillate properly, and I suspect this one won't oscillate properly either. And in most fans you buy, vintage fans, if you've got a fan that doesn't oscillate properly, chances are you've got worn gears. And that could be the case here, but quite often with these, it's actually an adjustment that can rectify an issue with the oscillate. Again, I haven't tested this fan, so I'm not sure if it oscillates properly or not. Okay, so that's your, this is the gear here, which is driven off the worm gear on the stator, on the rotor, sorry, which in turn turns the worm gear on the shaft that this is spinning on, which in turn then turns this fiber gear, which then distributes power to this wheel here, which then allows the thing to oscillate. Now, this grease from the manufacturer's handbook is to be replaced every 3 years. Now, how often do you think that actually happened? You saw the process that was required to get access to this thing. I'd say that this grease is the original grease from the early 1960s. That's, in most cases, that's the situation. The greases back in those days weren't as good as they are today. So it's important that when you repack these with grease, you get rid of all this old grease out of here first, degrease it all, and make it all spotless before you go any further. Incidentally, the gearbox assembly here is very similar between the different fan models in the Revelair range. So this is the one from this fan, obviously. This one here is from a tiny little 10-inch model. So as you can see, they're virtually the same except on the length of the output shaft. The output shaft on the big fan is longer. That's the only difference between them. So you can see that obviously it was cheaper just to make the same gearing, but it makes even the small fans completely overbuilt. You look at the thickness of this housing. These look like sand cast housings, very thick material. Again, an example of how overbuilt these old fans are or were compared with the stuff you buy today. So No point just adding degreaser to that pile. You just want to get rid of as much of this grease as you can. Try and clean all this out. Okay, so I'll keep going with this, and I'll come back when all this is all cleaned up and spotless. Okay, well that was a fun 20 minutes. Got all the old grease and goop out of there. Okay, so there's your output shaft and your fibre gear. Now, first thing I do when I look at these gears is I want to make sure when I'm looking at them, there's no missing teeth, there's no damage to the fibre gears. Now, personally, I'm just having a quick look at these. None of the fans I've looked at in the past have ever had any damage to these gears, but a mate of mine bought a desk fan, same size as this in the desk model, and his is all stripped out. So these must act as like a sacrificial gear in case the fan head itself can't rotate properly because it's hit an obstruction. That must be the reason why the gears on these are stripped, because from normal wear and tear, they don't have damage. They don't tend to wear out, which is good news. Now, the other gear here, this is the one that runs off the actual rotor shaft. Again, this is a nylon gear. It must be an excellent quality of nylon, because again, I've never seen one with visual wear on this gear itself. This worm gear here, looks pretty much pristine like that. This gear here operates on, or rotates on two pins, one here and one here. Now, they're driven in to the housing this way, and they're retained by a screw. Now, often when you buy these fans and they're not oscillating properly, it's because these pins have worn and this shaft has been enabled to move and then drop down. And what often happens is that it drops away from the rotor shaft, and it can't then drive this gear, so the thing won't actually operate and won't oscillate properly. Quite often when you buy these fans, you get them cheap because they won't oscillate. People assume the gears are all buggered. All you need to do is just release these two screws and then tap in these pins to make up for the wear. Take a look at the pins. These pins here, they should have no huge, so you can see that, no huge ridges in them or anything else like that. Should be a sort of a conical sort of a shape. Just check that they're in good shape. So obviously the gear itself lines up with the hole which the rotor shaft passes through. So you just lift up the output shaft gear and just slide this in, and that'll then sit on those pins. Now, just before I do that, I'm just going to load some grease in these holes here. Incidentally, when you replace the grease in these fans, you must use a high temperature bearing grease for disc brakes. That's the best stuff you can get. This stuff copes with high temperatures, but the main thing it does is it holds its shape and it doesn't migrate. You don't want this grease migrating out of down this shaft and out onto the flywheel and everything else. You can see by all the mess that's on that flywheel now, the grease has been doing that. But the fact that it's probably 60 years beyond its use by date could be part of the problem. So just a bit of grease, and just on the end, just basically fill up that little hole there. Make sure the grease is right down inside. There'll be some air in there, you just need to work that out. Actually, this is the perfect size for doing this. Because when you put grease in the gearbox, you're never going to be able to get it into these points here when you're just blobbing grease in there. So always put a bit of grease in there when you first put the shaft in. So I'm just putting lobs of grease in there. Okay, so I've just put that shaft back in place. I've just tapped these in gently, just on either side. Now what you want to try and do is have this gear centered roughly with this hole. So because you want it to ride directly onto that rotor shaft. So let me just tap these in. So it's roughly centered, and you want to have the tiniest amount of play. You don't want it loose, and you don't want it binding. Because if there's any excess drag on that particular shaft, it will slow the motor down. It won't operate properly. If you have it too tight, you just get a pair of pliers and you just pinch that edge of that pin that's poking through, just the tiniest amount, and that'll loosen that up again. It's a bit of a, these pins that go in pretty easily, sometimes you've really got to hammer them home. I'm just looking for the tiniest bit of play. So that's excessive. Okay, that's perfect. So it spins freely, but there's no, or very little end play. Okay, so these screws underneath here, just need to tighten those. So that's a bit of a tip there. If you do find a fan that's not oscillating properly, that quick adjustment can restore oscillation function. I probably have to do that to restore function in probably the third of the fans that I operate on. So quite a common problem. And as I said, anyone who's not familiar with these fans will assume that you've got gear wear, which for a lot of people causes them to instantly lose interest in the fan because, hey, where are you going to get new gears from? Unless you buy another fan and have to muck around doing that. Okay, so I'm just going to fill up the rest of the gearbox with grease. I'll just lift up that shaft, that output shaft, so you can get grease underneath. If you do take this shaft out, if yours comes out easily, there is a washer underneath there. You need to make sure that washer is replaced before you put that shaft back in. Now, they say every 3 years with the old grease to replace the grease. With this modern grease, that's too often, and it's a lot of work getting to this part of the fan. I'd say, quite frankly, for most people, once every 10 years. Once every 10 years, if you're using the right grease, like this Castrol HTB2, this stuff, if you're using the right stuff and the fan's just getting the average number of hours, I would say that every 10 years is probably sufficient. But the most important thing is the lubrication of the motor. That part is not negotiable. You must be adding oil. Now, once you've hydrated the oil system with the fan when you first restore it, you're looking at replacing or topping up the oil every 3 months, as is the general rule, depending on hours used, and you're applying between 3 and 5 drops of oil in each tube. Now, that's not much oil, it doesn't sound like much, but if the system's already packed with oil and you're just doing a top up, that's about how much oil is consumed by the fan in operation in that time period. If you don't apply oil, the bushings, the fan will keep operating, and you'd assume by the way it operates that it's perfectly fine, but it's not. It's destroying the bush, and eventually it'll be obviously worn when you'll get a fan that makes a rumbling noise. All motors require lubricant, even new fans. They all require lubricant. The difference is with the old fans, the manufacturers make it easier to replace that oil. Okay, so that amount of grease in there, that's about spot on. You don't want to fill it right up. There's no point doing that. As long as the gears are covered. When you were pulling this thing apart to clean, you would have noticed that if it's still there, and they usually are, there's an O-ring that operates on the underside here. That operates and stops any wayward grease or oil coming from the gearbox onto this shaft. Now, these O-rings can be reused. Sometimes they're a bit hard, a bit stiff, but if they're in one piece, reuse them because they are the correct size. I haven't been able to find the correct size replacements. I always tend to reuse them if I can. Okay, so that's now ready to go back on the fan motor. Anyway, so basically I'm just going to take this flywheel off. So there you go, there's more grease to clean off. This is a little plastic piece here which connects the screw to this point here. Now, if you look at the underneath here, you've got 3 holes, the one in the center, one here and one here. Now, where you have this pin here determines how the fan's going to oscillate. So if it's in the middle section here, middle hole, doesn't oscillate at all, just stays vertically straight ahead. This one will give you a gentle sweep and this will give you maximum sweep. So you're going to have wear in that, extra wear in that hole there. Again, that's not a problem unless it's worn right through. But again, this one here, that's pretty average. I'll clean this up and then I'll show you what it looks like once it's all cleaned. This center one here just looks like it's never been used. So the third one I should say, is the one with the wear. You can see a little bit of a shiny dip there. Now this section down here is a bit of a mess. So same deal, just go along with some degreaser, spray degreaser. Being careful not to get in the motor. So just going along here, I'm just cleaning all this up. You've got years and years of grease and goop on here, but what always amazes me is how well these components come up with just a clean, you know. We're then going to put fresh grease in here because this has to be lubricated because it is rotating the whole time. This is a fan where the gearbox is always engaged. Some fans, the gearbox disengages when you turn oscillation off. This one, it's always in mesh and has to be. Unless the gears are in mesh, the fan head itself isn't stable. If you disconnect the gearbox, this head just does this. So it's important that it's that operates is engaged all the time for that reason. Okay, rightio. So gearbox just slides in, the hole goes in there, engages with that gear, and you just hold it in place and put on your 2 screws. Now these screws are a fine thread and they're going into aluminium, so just be careful when you're driving them, when you're getting them started, you don't cause any galling, because if you were to strip these somehow in the way they go into the motor bracket, you've got a problem. Just tighten up this one. Okay, and then we'll just turn this shaft here, and we're just looking to make sure that the nylon gear is spinning freely, which it is. So that looks good. Just applying a bit more grease to the top of the worm drive. I just want to have that particular part of the gearbox internals covered with grease. Here's your gasket, so just clean that up. And the gasket, it helps if you have the gearbox level like that so this gasket doesn't fall down. And motor gearbox cover goes on. A single screw. Okay, next we'll put on the speed coil. So we've got this piece of isolation paper here, which is, isolates this metal surface from this. So always make sure that goes back on. This was sitting like this originally with this folded up bit at the top. And we'll do up those 2 screws. Okay, got that one started. Just making sure that that paper hasn't moved when you've been positioning it. Okay, right, it's nice and tight. And just on the other side here, we have this terminal, which is the other wire for the motor, and that just kicks in behind there. Okay, so I've just done up this this little screw here. Nice and tight. Okay, so we've got the motor cover, gearbox cover on. We've got the coil attached. We've got the switch connected. Now, as you know, we had to do no soldering at all to any of this, which is very different to the desktop models. Now, this wire here then gets placed into the neutral connection of this terminal. Okay, so we've just done that terminal up there. Okay. Now, on the other side is where the wiring goes for your new cord, which we'll now organise. When you look at this, you've got one screw here, which retains this component to the pole. We always check to make sure that's tight, which this one isn't. Important that's tight, because that stops when you lift the fan up, stops this end is falling off. Then we've got this screw here which retains this chrome bracket, and we've got a last screw down the bottom here that stops this pole from just falling through, and this protects the cord from being pinched. So this one here, that will never need to be touched. So this one here, we're just going to undo this so we can get this old cord out of the way. And we've got another thing needing cleaning, but that's, again, you look at that, first sight of that, when you see it on the fan, you think, oh, it's all rusted. That is just molten rubber. That all cleans off, so there's no problem there. Okay, so after a bit of cleaning, that's how it comes up. I'll tell you what, whoever the company was doing the chroming back then, they did a great job. This chrome is always in great shape. It's amazing. Okay, now, next step, we need to replace the power cord. 5-metre extension cord seems to be the cheapest way to buy cabling. Now, you're thinking 5 metres, why do you need such a long cord? Well, you're losing a couple of metres just in getting the cord to the ground for the pedestal fan. So the 5-metre cord is actually longer than the original cord. So you just get the female end and just trim that off. Put that in the bin. Okay, now we need to strip the wire back, and we need to strip enough wire to feed these two terminals here, and then to come down and to attach to the earth. Okay, so just been through the rewiring process, very simple on the pedestals. So we've got the left wire here is your active, which is the red wire. The blue wire is your neutral, which goes in this other terminal. And at the back here, we've got our earth. Now I've just put on a new ring terminal there and soldered that on there with a bit of heat shrink. So that's our 3 wires connected, and this cord relief here. Now this bracket has to be adjusted slightly. The cord we're using these days is a bit thinner than the old cord, so you just need to bend this down a bit slightly before you screw it on so that cord relief will operate properly. Right, now that that's done, we can now put this cardboard bit back on, which was obstructing our view before. So you take these back off again, these screws. And the cardboard piece goes back on, like so. Okay. And when the motor cover comes on, this flap will fold down, and that'll isolate all this electronic stuff from the motor cover itself. Okay, right, now I'll do a bit more cleaning and whatnot, and we'll come back and I'll show you how we do the rest of it. Now, just before I do that, as you can see, I've cleaned this bracket up here. Now the cord, I don't have the original style of cord relief that this fan would have came with. But what I normally use on pedestals is I'll just use a grommet, just like the ones same size I use on the motor cover, and I'll just slide that down the cord and then put the cord through the little bracket here. Okay, and after probably 5 minutes of polishing, that's how the oil plugs come up once they're polished, the brass. So yeah, massive difference. Just going to add some oil to this bush here, which enables the fan to operate back and forth. Using the correct 3-in-1 oil, you just tilt it back. Just add a few drops of oil. Just working it back and forth. You notice straight away when you do this that it automatically, just after a few drops of oil, just makes a huge difference. Just feels completely different in the way that this joint rotates. There you go, that's freed up. That's freed up big time just by doing that.
I was feeling a fair bit of slack in this joint, or what I thought was this joint before, but turns out that it was actually this screw here was loose, which meant that this billet of alloy here was rocking inside this tube. So, but just by simply tightening that up, it's taken a lot of that flat slack out. Now you've only just got a tiny amount, which is more commensurate with the amount of wear that it shows internally, because normally to have this joint completely worn out like it felt, I should have had a lot more play in this shaft. I should have had a lot more gearbox wear. Okay, so as you can see from the cage, what you normally have is you have a fine layer of rust around the chrome. And as far as chrome grills go, this one's actually pretty good condition. Now, in order to get that rusty rubbish off, but not to affect the chrome itself, is to use one of these stainless steel scourers. These are great. You just fill them up with water, clean the surface or wet the surface down, and you see that rusty material there, you just go across like that, work around both sides like so. You don't have to put a lot of pressure on it, just a gentle scrub, hose it off. Look at that, looks fantastic. So I'll go around and do the rest of the cage, and when I'm finished I'll come back. Okay, just polishing up the badge. This surrounding red section here is normally supposed to be translucent. Over time it becomes all opaque. So I've just got a bit of car polish. I'm just polishing up the plastic. There are dedicated plastic polishers out there, but I find that a normal cut and polish for paint that does the job. You don't have to go berserk on this. You just want to bring up the luster again. We just polish up that one bit, and you can see how that's already starting to come back up already, just after a few seconds. Okay, so there's the cage all scoured up. All the rust has been removed, and we'll dry that up now, and we'll get the centre badge ready. The bench here now. Now, we're just going to, after polishing up the motor cover, I'm just going to put it onto the fan now. Of course, in order to do that, I just need to undo this wiring here to get access to the undo these screws here for the power supply for the motor. Take off the cord relief, and also the earth. It's off. Just loosen those wires, they come straight off. Then we grab our motor cover, which is all polished up, and just pass it through the hole. Now we just need to grab one grommet. That's the size 1/4 by 1/2 inch. The size we tend to use for these things. So we just pass that over the wiring onto the cord. And I've already got the other grommet already on the cord for the cable relief. And you've got the hole in the side of the motor cover here, which you just pass the cabling through. Slide that down and then reconnect everything up to the terminals. Just retwisting these wires together. Now I've got that cage all cleaned up. I'm currently polishing the fan blade. The blade, the paint on it's pretty ordinary. It's not the best, but you know, sometimes I'll do repaint the blades if they need painting. This one, the paint's in not that good a shape, but it's not corroded. So I often justify the repaint of the blades if there's corrosion occurring, and I want to cease that. But as it is right now, there's no corrosion. It's just the paint's just tired. So I think I'll just leave it for the time being. I can always go back and paint the blade later if need be. Okay, so I'm just putting on the earth wire. This feeds in from underneath. Like everything, it's awkward to get on. Very important wire to make sure it's connected as your earth. Nice and tight. Okay, that's the earth connected. Rightio. Now we'll put in our cord relief. There we go. Slot the cord back in position. I've seen fans where this actual bracket here is not even attached. Okay, so we can see that there. It's all connected. Okay, now we're going to pass this through and reattach this to the motor. So we tilt this up, slide this on, and it'll sort of guide its way on. There we go. Okay. We've got our switch at the back there's free, got the output shaft there for the gearboxes in the right position. We've got this roughly centered on the top here for your oiler. So next thing, this long screw just goes in the back. Pretty self-explanatory, and you do this up and then it'll hold it all in place. Now, last step, we just get the one of these grommets, slide this up. We just tuck that into that hole there. These grommets are a good fit, but they're tight. It's important though, because the cord is moving around when this particular type of fan operates. So this being quite a thin metal, it will eventually cut through the cord if you don't have a grommet there in place. Okay, that's done. Now we've got our flywheel. Our flywheel just bolts in from underneath, like so. And we've got our grub screw, which we left inside the Allen key. We'll just tighten that on like so. And we'll just tighten it slightly tighter on this end. This is very important. If this isn't tight, the whole fan just flops around. It's amazing. One little screw can make such a difference. Now, we put a little bit of lube just inside each of these holes. Got one in the center there, and the outside one, because it does have to operate on this ball. So I'll just put a bit of lube on the ball there, and a bit on the inside as well, because you've got plastic on metal. So now I once saw one of these broken, but it's pretty unusual. So yeah, okay. Then we've got our screw, passes through here, and we'll slot this in. We'll slot it into the center position for testing, and we'll just turn this around to line up with the hole, which of course is on one spot where I can't reach. So this is one of the wonders of this model of fan. When you go to change the oscillation mode, you actually got to rotate the flywheel to be in the right position so you can get access. So I'll just turn that around. Now, yeah, so when you adjust the oscillation mode, you don't have to take this nut right out or this bolt right out. You just basically just loosening it up, and that enables you to change the position. Just slip this up. Okay, and we'll just rotate this around, tighten this up. Okay, now we've got the cord relief here. Basically, we're just putting the cord in like so, doing up this screw. Now we need to allow enough room for this cord, for this machine to move around in its normal rotation. So that's normally about right, just about that amount of slack there. You can adjust that later. But by just using a grommet, you can slide the grommet up and down at will. So, okay, so just wiring up a new plug. So you've just got your earth. This one here is your active and your neutral. So you then feed up the plug. Just one of those rubberized reusable plugs. You just push that back in place, put it in place. They're quite tight to get on these things. Okay, so that's on. Make sure you've got everything correct. You just put that on there and you just tighten that up. So it's not exactly the same as the original plug. It's not a vintage style plug either. These fans never had a Bakelite plug with them. But that's sort of a plug, you know, it's older sort of style. It's not like one of these molded ones that look completely inappropriate for a fan like this. Rightio. So here's a new plug. Here's the one that came with the fan. Looking a bit sad. Now, just for interest's sake, I just want to show you what the inside of these old cables look like. So as you can see, the outside looks like I need to clean, but it's, you know, pretty well looks okay. A lot of these fans go through safety and they go, yeah, there's nothing wrong with the cord. It looks good. Obviously, if it had an end like this, they wouldn't pass it. But let's have a look at what this cable looks like internally. Get rid of this. As you can see, there's actually one wire connected to this. So, okay, so the reason that the old cords are a bit thicker is they have this extra layer of insulation around the outside. This is like this sort of a canvasy material. So we'll just pull this apart and we'll just have a look. Now, take a look at the state of this. Look at that. That is what the wiring looks like. And I'll tell you, I don't know how many things I've bought to restore, you know, old toasters or mix masters, any of that sort of thing. It all has this rubber insulated wiring. That's what it looks like inside. So whenever you see anything of this era that's got the original wiring, get rid of it, because this will do you no favours. Okay, I'll just put the blade and cage on. I'm just going to do up the bolts here for the screws here for to retain the cage. Now, I haven't fired it up yet. I've plugged it. I've replaced the plug. I've done all that. I've put all these parts on, but I'm waiting for the fire up to see what we've got. Right. Okay. Here we go. This is your plug. Switch. It's turned off. Okay. Let's plug it in. Right. She's live. The big 1, 2, 3. Sounds pretty healthy to me. That's high, medium, low. Now, I will say one thing with Revelair fans, they're all the same. Don't have a great spread of speeds. Low is definitely lower than high, but there's not a great difference in the speed of the of the blade. But there is a difference. Here we go. As you can see, the fan itself is now pointing downward and then going across. We'll go up. This is the test of the gearbox too. When you put it on oscillate mode and you force the gearbox to go under load and lift the head of the fan up and down, that's when you find out if you've got any problems with the gearbox, any hesitations, if it hesitates to go up and across, then you've normally got a problem with wear and tear or some sort of adjustment issue.
But as you can see there, that's oscillating, no problem at all. Very, very smooth. And that's how they should be. That's how they work in the factory.